Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. I'm glad you're with us today. We just want to put up a little warning. This episode is about suicide ideation. I find it personally hugely important, and I have lots and lots of work out about it because I think it's a very consistent challenge to our society. And as decoders, I think it's really important that we decode these impulses, just not even for the whole world, but even in ourselves, to be able to look really closely at programming here. So just a little warning note, if there's little ones listening, maybe this isn't the best episode, but for you adult decoders, I think this will be a scintillating and exciting episode. Glad you're tuning in. Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. Welcome to Humans Decoded, a story of hobbits, fairies, elves, dwarfs, gnomes, and humans. If you get lost at any point, there is a deep dive on all the different avatars in episode 1. It includes notes. Thank you for joining us in a fun little chat about the vast potential of our human makeup. Hi, Cami. Hi, Leela.
Hey, girls.
Hi. What a joyful topic we've chosen today, this morning. It's like February, it's raining, it's cold, Sunday night for me. I feel like I need all my cashmere to be cozy and wrapped up for this.
Yep.
But yeah, it's important to shine a light on this topic.
Yeah, I think it affects so many people in the world, that the more of us decoders that are able to understand very directly what's going on, the better we are as a society to support these ideations.
I don't know if it's a weird thing to say, but I've actually really been looking forward to discussing this topic with you, because I know for me personally, it's been such a game changer being able to understand it. And I think part of the problem around suicidal ideation is that it's so taboo. So I think being able to deconstruct it in this space with you is, I mean, I know when I was exposed to it, it was just so unbelievably helpful. So yeah, I think it's great that we're kind of tackling it.
But there's also very specific inspiration behind why you wanted to talk about it today.
Yeah, recently we watched the Avicii documentary on Netflix. It's about this world-renowned DJ. You've absolutely heard of all of his hits, and he has this incredible life, incredible talent, unbelievable, like stratospheric career, and then he ends his own life. And so I turned to Kiran and I was like, we have to talk about this on the podcast. We have to like break it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also an important part in that documentary is they never really say it. It's so taboo.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the documentary, he dies.
Yeah, in my days as a journalist, and I mean, that's one of the reasons I want to talk about the topic, is we were never allowed to mention suicide in the paper because they were so afraid that there will be, people following that example. So we weren't allowed to put it in a paper. And even back in like the 1800s, when Goethe published The Sorrows of the Young Werther, there were tons of young men killing themselves, So there's this fear that if you talk about it, more and more are going to follow it, more and more are going to commit suicide, which I don't think that's actually true. It's the keeping it hidden that's so dangerous, if you want to call it like that. And, then I think I've mentioned it before on this podcast, I've had a partner who then committed suicide. So I'm like, okay, let's please shine some light of sanity on this topic. And, I can get quite angry when it comes to suicide because of all these taboos and all these stories around it. And I'm living in a country in Switzerland that has one of the highest rates of suicide, especially amongst young men. But there's no real equipment that we would give these young men, even though it's so common, right?
So yeah, I feel like the value in talking about it is taking the shame out of it. I know for me personally, I've had a lot of suicidal ideation in my life. And the first time I heard Kiran talk about it, she has this really brilliant podcast. It's on YouTube and we can link to it, but where she kind of breaks it down. And it turns out that it's actually very common. It's okay if it comes. It's not a harbinger of something terrible. It's actually signaling that there's probably some big up levels for you on the horizon. So I think just getting familiar with that kind of link, that just because suicidal ideation is here, it doesn't mean it's the end. It's like I've kind of retrained myself, and it's now I see it as like a signal of like, hey, good things are on the horizon. And that just liberates the whole thing, and it makes it so much lighter and so much easier to overcome.
Yeah, because it's exactly what you're saying, that the impulse or the perception of this suicide impulse is when it comes up, it's game over.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody freezes, fawns.
Mm-hmm.
Like you yourself, the whole of society, everybody's like, oh my God, okay, game over, goodbye. I can't. But that's so not what's true.
And it's ironic, though, isn't it? Because the actual signature says game over, game over, game over. And, I think that was so interesting about the Ceviche documentary. It just came out on Netflix. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, it's beautiful. And we'll link below to it. And what's incredible about that is that he goes through such a trial and such a struggle. There's a profound effort. If it's me, you can see this he's working against his own worthlessness, even though he's an extraordinary genius. And obviously he's surrounded himself with really terrible people, specifically managers. And I think we see this often, that the managers in most industry are driving the artists far beyond what would be delicious, or they're in their capacity, and helps to bring on a lot of the challenges. And I think a lot of the managers, honestly, in the entertainment world are responsible for the death of their clients. Certainly this one was. So he surrounded himself with a lot of bad influences, terrible people using him, driving him. He's extraordinarily challenged and exhausted, but that's not actually when this instance arises. He actually gets through it. He has an opportunity to actually like stop and get off this hamster wheel of everyone demanding things of him. And it's really amazing, because what happens is he stops, and he stops for a few years, and he rests and he recoups. And he very, very clearly says in the documentary what he wants, which is peace. He wants peace. He wants space to create. And it's after that he begins to meditate. And the documentary doesn't really show us like who his teachers are or what's going on there, again, because it might point to his suicide, and that's really taboo. But what I think is very, very interesting is that the suicidal ideation became so strong in him after he stopped and recovered. And what he was doing in this stopping, and certainly by practicing this meditation, is starting to turn in. And as he starts to turn inward, that flood of a belief system, that worthlessness, that story, and you decoders are familiar, we talk about this almost every week, that those internal belief systems come from fear, and they're inaccurate, but they are wildly trance-inducing. And we talk about the trance. We call it that la story. And it's this fear-filled bubble that disconnects you. And it's based in these like root fears. And so, I think a very, possible journey for Avicii is that he came inside, started to hear all of these belief systems of worthlessness. And then something I think all of us are so familiar with, the la trance, or that fear-filled bubble off, says these words. It says it's never going to get better. In fact, it's only going to get worse. And that voice comes up because the fear itself is trying to re-identify or re-anchor in your system. And the reason it's going to re-identify or re-anchor is because you have uplifted the anchor, right? So if you have already, through your own inquiry, through your own meditation, through stopping, have actually, or through any other, there could be all sorts of spontaneous things. You fell in love, you discovered some new insight, you read something that was inspiring. I don't know. Or you got a job offer, you got a house offer. And this is the piece, because we won't talk about suicide as a society. We can't track the data, except this is the story. It's that something has arisen, something new on the horizon is coming over. And this worthlessness is kicking back, and it's kicking back with the story. It's never going to change. It's never going to get better. It's only going to get worse from here. And it's not going to say that. It's not going to kick that way if it was deeply anchored in your system and you were identified. Do you know what I mean?
Then you don't even see it, or you don't even notice it, right?
It doesn't have to fight back. It's not trying to get your attention anymore. It's not trying to rehold the story of me, right? It's only going to grab for that story of me when you've already started to lift off of it.
That's that irony we've mentioned in one of the other episodes before, that if all that is happening, it's actually a good sign, right? It's a sign of something is transforming, something is unanchoring, as you just said, Kiran.
Yeah, and as Cami was saying, retraining her impulses.
Yes.
That when this impulse comes up, she's looking at the fact that, why is this hitting so hard?
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking right at that. Then something else must be coming in, something new, something deeper, something is happening. Our mind tells a story that if something new arises, especially something we've wanted, we're going to go, yay, yay, yay. But our experience in Decoders, this, our experience is that we start to feel terror like nothing before, because it's going to make us outgrow who we are. It's going to outgrow the identity. So these locked in belief systems that have identified who you are, and something new, especially a desire, starts to just peep over the horizon, and it triggers all of those identities, because it's going to ask you to be something different than you think you are in the moment of it. And this is deep psychological reality. And those resistance programs will kick up. And one of those resistance programs is suicidal ideation. It's a story of it's never going to get better. It's only going to get worse. I better kill myself, and these fantasies, these bubbled off, this is what we would again call that la. It's a bubbled off story, disconnected from reality, and telling this yummy thing of then you'll be gone. Then you won't be here to suffer, to struggle. The pain will be over.
Suicide itself is a Lala story. It's not Rara, because Rara would be that aggressive, kind of
you're worthless, you're a piece of shit, what are you doing, you don't deserve anything,
because it seems like suicide would be that, but it's not. It's the Lala of then I'm in heaven, or then I'm gone, and I don't have to,
I'm finally gone,
I'm free, I don't have to deal with all my
I'm free
shit anymore. And it's everything you're saying,
or this shit, this world shit, I don't have to deal with this fucking pain. I never wanted to be here in the first place. I never fucking asked for this. Get me out.
Yeah. These are almost the exact words I heard from my partner then. The things you're saying. So, yeah. And you're both saying it's so common. Most of us have this suicidal ideation, right?
Yes. It's just a really, really ancient old programming. So this is, very deep decoding. but I've been able to log a lot of hours watching these codings arising in people's systems as well as my own. It's so ancient. It's really back in the sort of like caveman day programming. It's still locked in our DNA, but it's kind of a like base survival instinct. And I think it's potentially a way for that being or that soul, however you want to call it, to kind of leave the body. And if you were in caveman days, maybe that was a great escape hatch, but it's very primal. It's so primitive. We've massively outgrown it. And it is true that there are some people that never really have much of that particular programming in their system, but that's rarer. It's actually more common that you have the programming in your system. Now, you may have never had to outgrow your identity in this. If you're listening to this podcast, that's probably not you. But if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably your mother. And you may look at your parents or your family or whatever and notice that there's very little evolution they've ever done in this lifetime. Who they were in high school is who they are today. Your mother is still a 14-year-old girl, or maybe your mother's still a 5-year-old girl. There are a lot of people on the planet that simply do not evolve. So nothing ever comes around the horizon. So nothing triggers it. It doesn't mean they don't have suicidal ideation. It means this wasn't a lifetime for them to evolve. It wasn't karmically appropriate. And that's beautiful and blessings to them. And as I always say, just let them stay asleep. There's no need. There's no need to wake them up yet. They'll be woken up next lifetime. However, most of us that are evolving means that things will come over the horizon, will ask us to expand beyond the current definition of ourselves. And when that happens, this ancient, primitive resistance pattern will kick out of the system. And as Cami says, it's a really great thing if we can all start talking about it, if we can start recognizing it for what it is.
Yes. And to start talking about it isn't, I've seen this campaign in Switzerland, like with like young people on a poster that are saying like, oh, do you have thoughts about suicide? Then talk about it. And but
I hate it so much.
That's not what we're saying. You've heard me say
this. You guys have all heard me. It's so not what suicide is. Like, it's so the wrong messaging, because the act of suicide is the fact that you want to deeply, secretly hold this card. It's like something has come up over the horizon and it's triggering, and we see this a lot in teenagers, because teenagers evolve. Hopefully not your parents, but other ones, maybe you. But teenagerhood is a time of evolution. So teenagers are often struggling against this ideation. It's hitting right up against it. And so what we're talking about is this secret little escape hatch, right? And decoders, you're probably familiar with these voices, right? Like, I don't belong here. I never wanted to be here. This place is shit. It's a fucking dumpster fire, whatever they call it. Like you hear this all over the place. You can hear it in your own head. I want out. And so you have this secret in your pocket, and it's this bubble off, fear entrancing la story. It's like you have a secret, and then like all of the advertising and support is like, tell us your secret. What it needs to say is, I know you don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
I know you're holding on to this, but I want to check your story. And maybe the messaging doesn't have to be so confronting. Maybe the messaging says, I know you don't want to talk about it. I know you have this secret, but listen, can I share a bit of the detail with you? Can I tell you a little bit about this coding? If the messaging went in that direction, that would be wonderful. I know you've got a secret escape hatch in your pocket. I know you do. But listen, can we talk about what that actually is? Because it isn't what you think it is.
Also, I would say my coding, when it comes around, also sounds like, I'll show everyone when I'm not here. So is it Do you think it's the shame that makes it so hard to bring these things up?
Shame is just a wonderful sort of like, it kind of coats the trance so that you don't, so that it's just remains secret in your, and shame works that way for everything. So a lot of us have an enormous amount of shame and are also unaware. It's literally just coding to keep the resist. It's like the left and right punch of resistance. You know, you're about to outgrow your identity, like who you think you are, you know, like everything you know yourself to be is actually going to change when you get the new job or fall in love or get pregnant or lost the pregnancy or, you know, something like this, right? Like whatever is coming over the horizon to open you up to something new. The trance starts to like bubble up, you know, it's never going to get better. It's only going to get worse. This place is a fucking dumpster fire. We got to get out of here. We never wanted to get out of here. You'll be free. Won't it be wonderful? Blah, 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 blah. And then that's the, you know, the one punch. And then the second punch is, and shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame. And
what kind of person are you that this should come up in you? Like, oh my God, don't tell anybody.
Yep, exactly. It's so shameful. And we reinforce that as a society by refusing to talk about it. We underline that it's shameful. And shame as a secretion is so captivating.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it's a really interesting practice to move your attention away from shame and back into the present moment. And you'll just notice how like that secretion, that energetic signature is so slippery and snaky, and like it kind of weaves this net around you, you know?
And let's not forget how every religion and every spiritual tradition reinforces that shame. That if you think about, if you contemplate your own death, taking your own life, that's sort of an act against God. And whether we're conscious of that or not, we, each of us, carry like a lot of that religious programming. Most of us do, unconscious or conscious. So that reinforces the whole shame wave that's already, you know, acting even more.
There's some statistical data that does mention if you've known somebody who's committed suicide, there's a greater chance you will. And I think you, Leela, directly know that. It's such a heartbreak. It's such a shock. It's actually going to really change you and move you past who you know yourself to be. And so it could trigger your own programming. And I think what happens a lot of the time when someone commits suicide is there's a shame that they took that cowardly way out.
Is what my mom said, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in some religions, like, you're not allowed into the gates of heaven if you take your own life. So yeah, it's like extra dose on top of all the other doses of shame.
Going straight to hell.
So Kiran, I've heard you talk about how suicidal ideation can be very common, and actually it gets triggered on gray days when things are kind of just mellow.
Yeah, I think our story of suicide, again, because it's underexposed, is that it happens when we're in so much pain, we're in the grip of pain. But the data is quite different. And so when we're in the most painful situations in our life, ironically, we are so present and alert because we're trying to survive. We are not pranced out into this little bubble off of any reality. The trance off is actually when it's just like, it's like a gray dullness, not a black, sharp pain. And I think that's surprising for people because even like we refer to this documentary for Vici, like his blackest days is not when he committed suicide. It was when it started to get much, much brighter. And I'm sure that there was even some beautiful sunny days, but there was some of these gray days, you know? And in the gray days is when he got really captivated by that story and started to make plans. So I think that, again, it's like we sometimes will say we have these things like it's the most dark, it's darkest before the light comes. And sometimes in our lives, it can be very, very dark and the light can start to come and it gets gray again. Not dark, but gray again. And that's really that coming in of those pain bodies, that resistance rolling back over you to say like, no, nothing's going to change. It's not going to get better. And it kind of rolls itself in on your sunshine. And that's when it starts to trigger and pop its various secretions that are highly, highly captivating.
Gosh. I mean, that's so true from my own experience. What you're saying, like the first couple of months after the suicide of my partner at the time, there was no chance. I had no energy. Like, how would I kill myself? There was no energy. But then there's a distinct moment a couple of months later. I remember I was smoking in a courtyard and, kind of contemplating my own suicide because I was done with this. And it's true. It was when it got gray. I could feel it's getting better and I didn't want it to get better. And that's when I remembered the words from that podcast episode you did, Kiran, on suicide. The words in there, it's just coding. And I kept hearing the words. And somehow that was really, really pivotal because I was like, it's just coding. It's not true. I don't have to follow it. And then, a couple days later, we had our first session and that turned my whole life around. So it's just coding to even keep hearing these words. That was so important and good. And for me, it was then that this suicidal ideation came up really strongly. I don't know that I've had it before like that, but you both said it's very common. We all have it. And for some of you, or for you, Cam, it began really young, right? Or for both of you, it began really young.
Yeah. I mean, it comes up for me every now and then. I remember being 6 years old and wanting to jump off the banister. I can't tell you that anything bad had happened in my life. It was just like this impulse, like I really, really want to go. I just want to go. And also I had it a couple of weeks ago because I think there's a lot of changes on the horizon for me. And then there it was again. But, I had all these great sort of prompts like, okay, it's a great day. And it's just coding. And there's change on the horizon.
And there's no shame. It's very normal. This is very normal.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember being early as 4 or 5 years old also and having these ideations. I remember taking a knife as a child and wanting to slash my wrists and wanting to, get out. And it wasn't in the most harrowing moments. As many of you know, my life was, especially my childhood life, was full of enormous amount of harrowing moments. It wasn't then. It was always when there was some level of recovery beginning or some support or some break or a pause from the violence that it was like, I remember feeling this. And of course, I remember starting it at 5 and thereon afterwards pretty regular. With some very real attempts, some actual very real attempts along the way. Which we laugh at
now.
because clearly I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very good at getting lost in that lull. I was willing to get checked.
Oh my God.
But the pain of that secretion and, not knowing that it's normal behavior, not knowing that it's just programming, not knowing that everyone has this doesn't help any of us. It doesn't help the world.
And there's also so much shame around if one of your loved ones dies this way. Like, it's not mentioned in the obituary. That detail is omitted. And you're kind of supposed to be silent about that. And, don't talk about it. And that's so fucking fucked up because then you're burdened on top of all that grief with the shame and that you're supposed to be quiet about it because it's shameful and makes me really, really angry.
Yeah, totally.
So I think what we're saying is let's talk about it. It's so, so valuable to just shed light on this. I mean, shame only thrives in like damp, dark environments. So I feel like having these conversations is like opening the lid, like let some fresh air in. And I mean, you wouldn't believe like how easy I find it to just bring it up all the time now, because it's so much better than keeping it inside. So yeah, I think let's bring it out into the open. We're going to have lots of links underneath that you can check out if you want more support. And share this episode with your friends. Let's take the taboo out of it and share it with everyone you know.
Awesome. I couldn't echo that more. Like, it's beautiful. So, signing off over here. Very happy about everyone talking about this. It's normal.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's not shameful. We know you don't want to talk about it. We know you got a hidden secret. Okay, decoders, we'll be here next week talking a bit more about avatars and various pressures that happen. And we look forward to being with you there next week. Enjoy the week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We obviously love hearing what you think. Your feedback helps us make a better show for you to listen to. So feel free to comment, and you can do it at Facebook, which is the Humans Decoded podcast. And if you're not on social, you can always email any questions to us at outreach@kirantrace.com. And thanks for listening. We love you.